He's a billionaire CEO, disciplined, untouchable, always in control. His days are measured in contracts and numbers, not people. But on one cold Chicago morning, something unexpected happens. He sees two young black twin boys standing alone in the park, holding out a small red toy car. No signs, no begging, just two kids with worn jackets and serious eyes offering the only thing they have, hoping anyone will buy it so they can afford medicine for their mother who's too sick to get out of bed. Most people walk past without a glance, but he stops. Because something in their eyes, something raw familiar, pulls him out of his routine. In that single moment, everything begins to shift. What starts as a small act of kindness turns into a journey that will challenge everything he thought he knew about love, about grief, and about what it really means to be a family. This is not just a story about wealth and generosity. It's about broken people finding each other at the right time, about healing in the most unexpected way, and how one small red toy car brought them all together. Before we begin, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. On a crisp October morning in Lincoln Park, Chicago, the wind danced through golden leaves and rattled the branches of trees, still clinging to the last breath of summer. Carlton Briggs stepped out of his town car, leather shoes clicking on the concrete as he adjusted the cufflinks on his tailored navy suit. The world around him hummed with the muted sounds of early city life joggers thudding past dogs barking in the distance, and the occasional honk from a cab driver navigating rush hour. Carlton's mind, however, was already blocks ahead on the 9 a.m. investor briefing waiting at his downtown office. Nothing explosive, but important enough: quarterly updates, market shifts, a new product roadmap to present. His team was prepped the boardroom would be full, and eyes would be on him to steer the conversation. It was routine, but routine mattered. Routine kept things tight, controlled. For the past 5 years, Carlton had built his empire with surgical precision, turning grief into productivity, isolation into structure. He didn't linger in public places like parks, didn't pause for the sentimental, and certainly didn't deviate from schedule. But on that morning, a flicker of movement, a quiet urgency out of step with the polished world around him, made him stop. Just ahead, near an aging oak tree shedding its final burst of color, two boys stood beside a bench holding something out to the passers-by. Their clothes were neat but worn, their sneakers scuffed, and their faces identical twins, perhaps 10 years old, skin the color of warm cedar framed by tight coils of black hair. One held a small red toy car in both hands, arms stretched with a kind of reverence as though offering something precious. Carlton's eyes narrowed, curiosity eclipsing routine. The boys looked fragile, yet determined, standing in the open air like tiny statues of hope carved from desperation. Most people didn't even glance their way. One woman passed with a tight smile but didn't stop. A suited man brushed past them, adjusting his AirPods without acknowledgement. The boys didn't move, just stood there, silent eyes scanning, waiting. Then the smaller twin stepped forward. His voice, though soft, cut through the city's background, static, with disarming clarity. "Sir," he said, catching Carlton's gaze, "would you buy our car? Please, it's all we got." Carlton blinked. The boy didn't flinch. There was no sales pitch, no rehearsed line, just raw honesty, trembling slightly in the morning chill. The red toy car caught a sliver of sunlight, glinting faintly like a relic. Carlton didn't speak. Something about the boy's eyes, a mirror of emotion too deep for someone his age, held him there. "It's fast," the other twin chimed in, his voice barely above a whisper. "And the door's open. And it still works." He reached up and demonstrated clicking the tiny doors outward with careful fingers. "We clean it every day." Carlton took a step forward, drawn by something he couldn't articulate. His gaze flicked from the toy to the boys' faces, then to their hands, small, thin, and trembling slightly from the cold. He noticed how they huddled together, how their backpacks sagged heavily, how their shoelaces were tied with precise knots, as if someone had taught them to hold on tight to the little things. "Why are you selling it?" he heard himself ask, surprised by the weight in his voice. The boy holding the car looked down, then up again, with a courage that seemed pulled from somewhere deep. "Our mom's sick. We need to get her medicine. We thought, maybe if someone bought the car, maybe we could get enough." The older twin said, his voice barely louder than the whisper of wind rustling through the park trees. His fingers clutched the red toy car tightly, not just as a transaction, but like he was letting go of a part of his childhood. "She hasn't been out of bed in days," the younger one added, his eyes wide, shimmering with the kind of fear children shouldn't have to know. "We tried calling places, but they said we needed insurance, and we don't have any. Mama used to work at the diner, but she got too weak. We don't have no family around. Just us." They looked up at Carlton with identical eyes, big, honest, scared, but there was something else in them, too, hope. Fragile, desperate hope. "This was our favorite toy," one said, forcing a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But if it can help Mama feel better, then it's worth it." The world around Carlton stilled. The wind, the people, the pressure of his day all faded into the background. He didn't see children anymore. He saw resilience in miniature, pride wrapped in hunger, desperation wrapped in dignity, the kind of dignity that refuses to beg, that offers a toy instead of a plea. And he realized with a start that they weren't just trying to survive. They were trying to protect someone they loved. His mind flashed, uninvited, to an old memory. His own daughter, Lily, showing him her crayon drawings, insisting each was a gift he had to keep. That same fierce sincerity now stared up at him from two unfamiliar faces. For a moment, the older twin looked up at him, and Carlton froze. The shape of his eyes, the intensity in them, it wasn't exact, but it was enough. Enough to punch a hole through the armor Carlton had built around his grief. Lily used to look at him that way when she was worried about her mom. The protective kind of fear that only small children carry with impossible strength. The boy didn't speak, but Carlton could feel the weight of that look settle deep in his chest, like an echo from a time he'd buried. Without speaking, Carlton reached into his coat pocket and retrieved his wallet. He pulled out a few crisp bills, more than enough for a full prescription, maybe even a week's groceries, and extended them. The boy hesitated, staring at the money as though it might vanish. Then slowly, carefully, he placed the toy car into Carlton's hand. His fingers lingered a moment, not wanting to let go. It was, after all, the last thing he had to give. "Thank you, sir," the boy said, voice trembling. "This'll help our mom. She's got a bad fever. She can't get up." Carlton nodded, folding the money into the boy's hand, then watched as the twins turned, gripping the bills like treasure, and hurried down the path with quick, focused steps. He should have moved on, should have kept walking, gone to his meeting, and returned to his fortress of productivity. But his feet didn't obey. He stood there, the small toy car nestled in his palm, like a message he hadn't expected to receive. He looked up, trying to spot them again through the thinning crowd. Their silhouettes darted past, a bench disappeared behind a tree. Carlton's driver, who had been waiting at a respectful distance, approached. "Sir, your meeting." Carlton raised a hand. "Follow them," he said quietly. The driver blinked. "Sir, the twins." Carlton repeated, already moving toward the street. "Stay close. I want to know where they go." As he walked, something churned inside him. It wasn't charity. It wasn't guilt. It was that look, that unbearable familiarity in the boy's eyes that had cracked something open. He remembered the last photo he'd taken of Lily, how she'd clutched her toy car just like that, smiling too wide for such a small face. He'd kept that picture hidden in his drawer for years, unable to face it. But now it burned in his memory like a flare in the dark. These boys didn't know him. They didn't know Lily. And yet their pain, their fight to save their mother, felt intimately known. It was as if life had thrown him a mirror, tilted slightly to reveal something he hadn't dared look at in years. Carlton didn't know where this road led. He only knew he had to follow. As the black town car pulled slowly behind the boys at a distance, Carlton sat inside, staring at the toy in his hand. He ran his thumb along its edge, feeling the worn plastic, the chipped paint, the tiny fingerprint smudges. It was the kind of object his old life would have dismissed as junk. Now it felt heavier than gold. The boys didn't look back as they turned off the main road and entered a side alley that led to a row of aging apartment buildings. Carlton followed their path with his eyes, noticing the broken sidewalk, the boarded windows, the sense of abandonment pressing in like fog. They reached a crumbling brick structure with a busted intercom, climbed the stairs two at a time, and disappeared inside. The town car rolled to a gentle stop across the street. Carlton remained still. The toy car rested in his lap, a reminder that something small, a gesture, a voice, a moment could tear open the seams of an otherwise airtight life. He felt it, though he couldn't name it. A shift, a fault line opening inside. And for the first time in years, he didn't want to look away. The building rose like a forgotten relic, red brick dulled by years of smog and rain, its edges cracked windows, smudged curtains drawn permanently against the outside world. Carlton stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the structure with a strange sense of dissonance. This wasn't his world. He belonged to skyline penthouses and glass-walled boardrooms, not to broken gutters and rusted stair rails. And yet, here he was, a man who built empires, standing before a crumbling facade, all because two boys had offered him a plastic car in exchange for hope. He crossed the street slowly, the cold air biting sharper now, or perhaps that was just his nerves catching up to him. He didn't have a plan. There was no forecast, no agenda, only instinct. He pushed open the battered front door and stepped into the dim lobby. It smelled of damp wood and old cigarettes. The overhead light flickered once, then buzzed into darkness. The staircase creaked under his weight as he climbed each floor narrower, closer, as if the building itself was pressing in on him. He paused on the fourth landing. There it was, the sound of small voices, the rustle of paper, someone coughing. He moved toward the noise, stopping before a door with peeling paint and a number so faded it was barely legible. He knocked gently. Silence. Then faint footsteps, then a pause, a soft voice through the door. "Who is it?" Carlton cleared his throat. "It's the man from the park," he said, trying to sound less like a stranger and more like someone meant to be there. Another pause, then a cautious creak as the door opened an inch. One of the twins, Tyrese, he thought, peeked out. His eyes widened when he recognized Carlton, and without a word, he pulled the door open wider. Both boys stood side by side, identical in size and expression, uncertainty painted across their small faces. Behind them, Carlton glimpsed the apartment. It was shockingly bare. The walls were stained and uneven, the floor thin and warped but clean. Always clean. That's what struck him most, not what was present, but what was absent. No decorations, no electronics, no signs of comfort, only survival. At the far end of the room, laid out on a thin mattress directly on the floor, was a woman. She lay on her side, her chest rising with visible effort, one arm bent awkwardly beneath her. Her skin was pale, drawn tight over cheekbones that once might have been full. Even from a distance, her resemblance to the boys was undeniable. The shape of her eyes, the angle of her jaw, the curve of her lips. "Can I come in?" Carlton asked, voice softer, now stripped of his usual authority. Tyrese looked to his brother, who gave the faintest nod. The boy stepped aside, and Carlton entered the toy car, still cradled in his coat pocket. Inside, the air was thick with heat and something else, something sterile and heavy, perhaps sorrow. The apartment was small, barely one room, with a portable stove and a cracked sink pushed into one corner. A single folding chair leaned against the wall. A small table held together with tape, and Hope bore a few half-eaten crackers and an empty bottle of cold medicine. "She's sleeping," Darius whispered. "She was talking earlier. Now she just sleeps a lot." Carlton approached slowly, kneeling beside the mattress. He'd seen sick people before in hospitals and philanthropic visits, but never like this. Never in the quiet, never with children hovering close. The woman's face twitched slightly as he reached out, placing the back of his hand against her forehead. Her skin burned with fever. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale a battle. "How long has she been like this?" he asked, barely above a breath. 3 weeks, Tyrese said. His voice cracked. "She stopped going to work, and then she couldn't walk. We thought she'd get better. We kept waiting." Carlton swallowed hard. "She needs a hospital. Now." "We don't have money," Darius whispered, clutching the crumpled bills Carlton had given them earlier. "That's why we were selling the car. For her medicine." Carlton sat back on his heels, the words echoing louder than any boardroom argument he'd ever heard. He looked at the toy still in his pocket. A child's treasure given up for a mother's survival. He felt it again, that stirring in his chest, ancient and unfamiliar, as though his heart was remembering how to beat for someone else. "I'll take care of it," he said, standing. The boys stared up at him, stunned. "But how? How will we ever pay you back?" Tyrese asked. Carlton looked down at them, his voice unusually gentle. "You already sold me your car, remember? Now it's my turn." He didn't wait for permission. Moving with calm efficiency, he scooped their mother into his arms, careful not to jostle her head. Her body was light, terrifyingly so. She mumbled something incomprehensible, her fingers twitching against his chest, as if trying to fight off sleep. The boys rushed to grab the front door, opening it wide, as Carlton carried her into the corridor. "What's happening?" Tyrese asked, trying to keep up. "She's going to people who can help her." Carlton said, already reaching into his coat for his phone. "Stay close." Down the stairs, out into the street, and into the back seat of the waiting car. The driver said nothing as Carlton slid in, giving only a quick nod as the vehicle pulled away from the curb. Tyrese held his mother's limp hand, his face pinched with fear. Darius leaned against the car door, eyes darting between his brother and Carlton. Carlton didn't speak as he dialed a private contact at the hospital. His voice, when it came, was calm and commanding, each word laced with urgency. "I'm bringing in a patient. Female, mid-30s. High fever, possible kidney complication. No insurance. I'll cover everything. Prepare the ER." As the car wove through traffic, Carlton glanced at the boys beside him. They weren't speaking, but their faces told everything. Fear, confusion, hope, fighting with panic. Carlton didn't know what compelled him to do this. For years, he'd built his life like a vault, shutting out anything that could threaten control. He avoided attachment, pity, empathy. But now he was in a car with two strangers and their dying mother, and it felt right. He realized with startling clarity that his life was no longer untouched. It had been pierced gently, irrevocably by a moment in a park. And no matter what happened next, it could never go back to the way it was. The hospital's automatic doors parted with a sterile hiss, and Carlton strode through them with Angela in his arms, her body light and frighteningly still. The ER nurses snapped to attention, and for a moment the room stilled around his commanding presence, a man out of place in his sharp suit and expensive shoes, yet moving with purpose that left no room for questioning. "Mid-30s, female, unconscious, high fever, possible renal failure," he announced with a crispness that didn't betray the churn in his gut. The twins trailed close behind their eyes, wide steps, small and hesitant, barely managing to keep up as Angela was lifted from his arms to the waiting gurney, disappearing behind a curtain. Carlton turned, caught the dazed look on Tyrese's face, and the way Darius clutched his brother's arm like an anchor. "Stay close," he said, softly guiding them toward a row of chairs. The boys sat stiffly, hands in their laps, saying nothing. A nurse handed them juice boxes, which they accepted but didn't open. Carlton sat between them, the toy car still tucked inside his coat, heavier now with implication. A doctor in scrubs approached, tablet in hand, eyes flicking between Carlton and the twins. "You brought her in." Carlton nodded. "Yes." She was unresponsive, high fever, labored breathing. "It's been progressing for weeks, according to her sons." The doctor's brow furrowed. "She's severely dehydrated. Blood pressure is crashing. We're preparing for dialysis. Kidneys are shutting down." "Do you know her medical history?" Carlton shook his head. "She's not insured. She's been avoiding treatment." The doctor nodded grimly. "Well, avoiding it nearly killed her. We'll stabilize her, but she's not going home anytime soon." He glanced down at the twins who were listening closely, despite pretending not to. "They need someone to authorize care. Are you family?" Carlton hesitated. The easy answer, the honest answer, was no. He was no one. A stranger. A buyer of toys. A man who had stumbled into a moment he could have just as easily walked away from. But then he looked down at the boys again, at Tyrese's hands, fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie, and Darius's eyes locked on the hallway their mother had disappeared into, and the word came out without effort. "Yes," he said, "I am." The doctor didn't press. He had a patient to save. Papers would come later. He disappeared into the chaos behind the curtain. Carlton sat back, exhaling slowly, the reality of what he'd just said settling around him like new skin. "Is she gonna die?" Darius asked so quietly, Carlton almost didn't hear it. He turned, shook his head. "Not if we can help it." The boy nodded, the muscles in his jaw tightening, as if bracing for more bad news. A nurse arrived with a clipboard and a polite but firm smile. "Mr. Briggs," Carlton replied. "Carlton Briggs." She glanced down at the form. "Are you the patient's next of kin or legal guardian?" Carlton met her eyes steadily. "For now, I'm assuming responsibility. I'll cover the costs, and I'll sign whatever's needed to get her treated." She blinked thrown for a moment, then nodded, making a note. "I'll have the administrator bring the paperwork. It's a lot, but it'll move things along." As she left, Carlton sat back, trying to comprehend the velocity of the choices he was making. Hours ago, he was headed to a boardroom to finalize a deal worth $85 million. Now, he was in an emergency room, pledging care for a woman he didn't know, shielding two children from a reality too big for their shoulders. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out, read the text. Reminder 9:0 a.m. investor presentation, mandatory attendance, conference room A. He stared at it for a long moment, then unlocked the screen and opened his calendar. Dozens of appointments glared back at him, calls, meetings, flights. It was his empire, carefully structured, ruthlessly efficient. And suddenly, he wanted none of it. He pressed a button, called his assistant. She answered immediately. "Mr. Briggs, I was just about to cancel everything. Sir, clear my schedule until further notice. The meeting, the call with Shenzhen, the private dinner tonight, everything." There was a pause. "Should I reschedule?" "No, just clear it." He ended the call before she could ask anything else. He looked over at the twins who had dozed off beside each other, heads touching hands, still clasped. For a moment, he didn't see them as orphans in waiting. He saw children, brave ones, trying to keep their world from falling apart using nothing but a toy car and a willingness to hope. He reached into his pocket and pulled the car out, turning it slowly in his hand. The wheels squeaked faintly. The paint had faded along the edges. There was still a tiny bit of sand stuck in the grooves, probably from some long-lost playground. It wasn't worth money. It was worth memory. The doctor returned a while later, face tired but steady. "She's stabilized. We've started fluids and dialysis. Her condition is critical, but improving. She'll need to stay possibly for weeks. We're running more tests." Carlton nodded. "I want her to have everything she needs." "That won't be a problem," the doctor replied, pausing before asking again more gently this time. "Are you sure you want to take this on?" Carlton didn't answer directly. He turned to the sleeping boys, then back to the doctor. "Yes, I'm sure." Papers came. Forms were signed. Insurance was arranged through Carlton's personal network. A private room was requested. Nurses were instructed to keep him updated around the clock. One of them hesitated when asked about the boys. "They can't stay in the hospital long term. Visiting hours are restricted, especially for children." Carlton understood. He looked down at the two boys again, exhausted and curled together like two halves of one soul. He stood, walked over to them, and knelt. "Hey," he said softly, "time to go." Tyrese stirred first, eyes fluttering open, confusion flickering in his face before recognition returned. "Is she okay?" Carlton nodded. "She's stable. The doctors are going to take good care of her now." Darius blinked awake, rubbing his eyes. "Can we see her soon?" "But it's late. And you both need sleep too." He walked them out of the ER and into the night. The sky had shifted to that pre-dawn blue, soft and endless. The city was quieter now, less aggressive. His driver opened the door. Neither boy asked where they were going. Carlton didn't offer an explanation. He simply said, "You're staying with me until she gets better." The car pulled away from the curb and headed into the silence of a world neither boy had ever imagined they'd see. Carlton sat back in the seat, the toy car resting once again in his lap. Outside the skyline loomed ahead his domain. But for the first time, it didn't look like power or profit. It looked like distance, a place he used to live. The boys sat quietly on either side of him, not quite leaning into him yet, but not pulling away either. And as the car curved through the early morning streets, Carlton Briggs, man of numbers and mergers, felt something reassemble quietly inside his chest. The car glided through the pre-dawn streets, the city still asleep, as Carlton stared out the window, the twins silent beside him. Tyrese sat to his left, curled against the door, half asleep, while Darius leaned lightly against Carlton's arm, eyes open, unblinking. They didn't speak, didn't ask questions, didn't complain about the cold or the confusion that must have been swirling inside them. The air in the car was warm, the seats soft, but there was tension wrapped around the silence, a tension built from fatigue, fear, and the unfamiliar. Carlton looked down at the toy car still in his hand, fingers absently tracing the chipped paint and worn wheels. And for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about his quarterly numbers, stock projections, or pending board approvals. He was thinking about how two little boys had walked into his life and unsettled everything. By the time the car turned down a long, tree-lined drive, the sky had turned a hazy pink. The mansion appeared slowly from behind the hedges, stone and glass, modern and expansive, with tall iron gates that opened automatically at their approach. The twins straightened, peering out the windows. Their eyes grew wider the closer they got. Darius whispered, "Is this a hotel?" Therese shook his head, awestruck. "It's a castle." Carlton didn't answer. He simply watched them watch the house, surprised by the strange warmth he felt at their wonder. The car stopped before the front entrance. The driver got out to open the door, but Carlton waved him off and stepped out first. He turned to the boys, offering a hand. "Come on," he said quietly. They slid out, still holding their backpacks like shields, glancing up at the towering windows and curved stone arches. Inside the house was silent. The floors gleamed. The walls were decorated with framed abstracts and a few black and white photographs of landscapes Carlton had collected over the years. Everything was neat, calculated immaculate until now. The boys hesitated at the threshold, unsure if they were allowed to walk on the pristine tile. Carlton noticed and gave a short nod. "You can come in. It's just a house." Darius took the first step. Tyrese followed his eyes, darting from the high ceilings to the marble staircase. "It's huge," he murmured. "Do you live here by yourself?" "I do," Carlton replied, "but not tonight." He led them into the kitchen, a sleek space with stainless steel appliances, a polished island, and floor-to-ceiling cabinets. The refrigerator hissed softly as it cycled. Carlton gestured to the stools along the counter. "Sit. I'll see what we can find for breakfast." The boys climbed up awkwardly, legs dangling, hands still gripping the edges of their seats. Carlton opened the fridge and realized instantly he had no idea what children ate. Bottled water, yogurt, eggs, wine, protein, shakes, nothing remotely comforting to a 10-year-old. He pulled out a carton of eggs and bread, then opened a cabinet and stared at the rows of dry goods as if they were labeled in another language. "What do you like?" he asked over his shoulder. "Pancakes," Tyrese said quickly, then added, "We usually have toast, though." "When we can." Carlton pulled out a loaf of bread and a stick of butter, then grabbed a pan and turned on the stove. He wasn't a cook. In fact, he hadn't made breakfast in years. Still, he moved methodically, buttering the bread and cracking eggs into the pan like he was following a formula. The boys watched him intently, whispering to each other, glancing around the kitchen like tourists. He served them quietly, placing the plates in front of them and sliding 2 glasses of orange juice across the counter. Darius took a bite, and his face lit up. "This is good." "Yeah," Tyrese added. "Tastes like real food." Carlton smiled faintly and poured himself coffee. He leaned against the counter, sipping slowly, watching them eat. They didn't rush. They didn't waste. They ate with the precision of kids who knew better than to leave anything on the plate. After breakfast, he showed them the guest suite, an airy room with 2 beds, a large window overlooking the back garden, and an ensuite bathroom. "You can sleep here for now," he said. "We'll figure out something better soon." The boys stepped inside, cautiously dropping their backpacks near the door. Darius ran his fingers along the bedspread. "It smells clean." Tyrese opened the closet wide-eyed at the space. "It's bigger than our old room." Carlton didn't correct them. He left them to explore, stepping into the hallway and closing the door behind him. In his study, he sat at his desk, staring at his phone. It buzzed again, emails, texts, reminders, but he ignored them. Instead, he reached for the toy car, now resting beside his keyboard, and placed it next to a framed photograph of his daughter. Later that morning, he made a few calls. The hospital updated him. Angela was stable, responding to treatment, but in no condition to be discharged. A dialysis plan had been initiated. They expected she would need at least several weeks of inpatient care. He arranged for a private nurse, signed off on all treatment costs, and requested to be notified of every change. He then called his housekeeper, Mrs. Lawson, and asked her to come early. "I have 2 children staying with me," he said, surprising even himself with how naturally the words came. "They'll need meals, clothes, basic things. Think. Everything." She didn't question it, just said, "Of course, Mr. Briggs," and hung up. That afternoon, he drove the boys to the hospital. They rode in silence, dressed in clean clothes Mrs. Lawson had picked up on her way in. When they stepped into the hospital room, Angela was awake. Her skin looked less ashen, her breathing steadier. Her eyes widened when she saw her sons. "My babies," she whispered. Tyrese rushed to her side. Darius followed, slower, hesitant. "Mom," they breathed, wrapping their arms around her carefully, afraid they might break her. She reached out, touching their faces with trembling hands. "You're safe," she murmured. "You're okay." Carlton stood back, watching. Angela looked up, her gaze landing on him. "Thank you," she said, voice raspy. "You didn't have to. It's fine," he replied, cutting her off gently. "You need to focus on getting better." They sat together for nearly an hour. The boys recounted their night, the big house, the breakfast, the room. Angela listened, tears brimming in her eyes, torn between relief and guilt. When the nurse came in to check her vitals, she looked at Carlton again. "I can't let you do this forever," she said quietly. "When I'm stronger, I'll leave. I'll figure something out. You've done more than enough." Carlton didn't respond. He just nodded once, then turned to the boys. "Let's let your mom rest." Back at the house, a quiet rhythm began to form. Carlton worked from home, but his routine was no longer his own. He found himself making breakfast, packing small lunches, explaining homework instructions. He showed them how to use the telescope in the library. He helped them name constellations. He taught them chess, though they caught on faster than expected. Sometimes he caught himself smiling when he heard their laughter echoing down the hallways. Sometimes late at night he walked past their room and paused, listening to the soft murmur of their voices, the comforting sounds of life, returning to a house long emptied of it. One evening he found Tyrese sitting in the garden alone. The sky streaked with purple as the sun dipped behind the trees. Carlton sat beside him, silent. After a moment, the boy asked, "Is it weird having us here?" Carlton shook his head. "No, not weird. Different, but good." Tyrese nodded. "It's weird for us too, but also kind of nice." He paused, then looked up. "Thanks for not making us go to foster care or something." Carlton didn't know what to say, so he simply reached over and squeezed the boy's shoulder. And for the first time in years, he felt the house was no longer echoing for the dead. It was ringing with something else entirely, something alive, something that sounded like hope. The days began to blur, each one starting with the sound of footsteps in the hallway and ending with the soft murmur of voices from the guest suite. Carlton found himself adjusting to the rhythm before he even realized it. Waking earlier, setting 2 extra places at the table, checking to make sure the boy's favorite cereal was stocked, without consciously admitting it was now part of his routine. Tyrese and Darius had settled in faster than he expected, though they remained careful, never quite letting go of the sense that all of this could vanish at any moment. They were polite, quiet, helpful in the way only children raised in uncertainty could be, always watching for signs of shifting tides. Yet their laughter, when it came, was unguarded pure. It echoed through the halls of Carlton's house like sunlight spilling through blinds long kept closed. They started calling him Mr. Carlton. At first, it had been Sir, formal and distant, the way they'd been taught to address grown-ups they didn't know. But gradually, something softened. "Mr. Carlton, can we use the telescope again tonight?" "Mr. Carlton, can we try baking cookies this weekend?" The name lingered warmly in the air, somewhere between authority and affection. One Saturday morning, while Mrs. Lawson was preparing breakfast in the kitchen, Carlton stood in the study watching the boys play in the backyard. The garden had never meant much to him. It was a landscaped formality, maintained for aesthetics, not for use. Now it bore the scattered remnants of a makeshift soccer match. A ball half buried in mulch footprints, in the flower beds 2 sweatshirts draped over a bench as makeshift goalposts. Tyrese kicked the ball toward Darius, who missed it entirely, both of them, collapsing into laughter that made Carlton's chest tighten unexpectedly. He was about to turn away when the crash came. It was sharp, definitive, the unmistakable sound of something delicate meeting tile floor. Carlton crossed the foyer in seconds, footsteps urgent, entering the hallway, just as Darius stood frozen in place, surrounded by the shattered remains of a porcelain vase. The boy's eyes were wide with horror, his lips parted but silent. Tyrese stood behind him, equally stunned, one hand reaching out as if to rewind time. The vase had been a gift from a French diplomat, part of a limited collection, insured, cataloged, and until now intact. Carlton looked at the shards, then at Darius, whose lower lip had begun to tremble. "I'm sorry," the boy whispered. "I was just running. I didn't see it. I didn't mean to. I swear." Carlton took a breath. Not deep, not dramatic, just enough to slow the reaction that wanted to rise in his throat. He crouched slightly, making his voice steady. "Are you hurt?" Darius shook his head, tears threatening. "No, sir." Carlton nodded once. "Then we're fine. It's just a vase. Things can be replaced." The relief hit the boys like wind through a broken dam. Tyrese let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Darius blinked rapidly as if waiting for a second wave that never came. Carlton stood, glanced at Mrs. Lawson, who had arrived with a broom and quiet efficiency. "Let her handle this. You 2 go grab your jackets. It's a nice day. Might be time for a walk." The boys didn't question it. They disappeared down the hallway, still stunned but grateful. Mrs. Lawson began sweeping silently, casting Carlton a glance that was equal parts approval and curiosity. He said nothing, just turned and walked to the far side of the hall, where the locked door remained unchanged. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep and the house had gone quiet, Carlton found himself in front of the door again. The key was already in his hand. He didn't remember retrieving it, only that it had been in the desk drawer where he kept things that mattered too much to throw away and hurt too much to look at. He gripped the key, slipped it into the lock, but didn't turn. The door remained closed. He stood there for a long time listening to the silence behind it, wondering if grief had a sound, and if so, whether he was hearing it now. Sometime past midnight, a muffled noise stirred him from sleep, a soft, choked sound that pulled him from the edge of dreams. He rose, heart already pounding, and moved down the hall. The twins' door was cracked open. Inside, moonlight spilled through the window, casting silver shapes on the floor. Darius was sitting up in bed, knees pulled to his chest, tears tracking silently down his cheeks. Carlton knocked once gently. "Hey," he said. The boy startled but didn't shrink back. "I didn't mean to wake anyone," Darius said quickly, wiping his face. "It's okay," Carlton said, stepping inside. He sat on the edge of the bed, not too close. "Bad dream," Darius nodded. "About Mom. I keep thinking, what if she doesn't get better? What if we lose her? We already lost Dad. Sometimes people don't come back." Carlton was quiet for a moment, the weight of the words pressing against his ribs. Then slowly he said, "She's strong. You know that, right? She's already getting better. She's got doctors helping her now. And you. She's fighting because she has you two to fight for." Darius wiped his eyes again, sniffed. "Do you think she'd want us to stay here with you?" Carlton looked at him carefully. "I think she'd want you to be safe, to be loved, wherever that is." Darius leaned slightly toward him, just enough to rest his shoulder against Carlton's arm. Carlton didn't move. He simply sat there until the boy's breathing slowed, until his eyes began to close, until the weight of the day gave way to sleep again. Outside the room, Carlton leaned against the wall and exhaled. He realized his hand was still in his pocket, fingers wrapped around the toy car. The morning was unusually quiet. The boys were outside with Mrs. Lawson, helping her tend to the garden, their laughter drifting faintly through the open windows. Carlton stood alone in the upstairs hallway, the red toy car nestled in his hand, thumb brushing absently over the chipped paint. His eyes were fixed on the door at the end of the hall. The door had remained locked for 5 years. He walked toward it slowly, heart heavy but steady, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he slid the key into the lock and turned it. The room smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Light spilled through the curtains, catching on motes in the air. Everything was as he'd left it, the twin bed with a floral comforter, the bookshelf lined with children's novels and picture books, the worn teddy bear sitting neatly on the pillow. But his eyes were drawn immediately to the desk beneath the window. On it sat a photo in a simple white frame. He picked it up, breath catching in his throat. It was a picture of him, his wife, and their daughter smiling on a warm summer day in the park. The little girl stood between them, beaming at the camera, arms stretched wide. In her left hand, she held a small red toy car, the same car that now sat in his palm. Carlton stared at the photo, his mind unraveling. His daughter had adored that car. She never went anywhere without it. It had been a birthday gift, and from the moment she received it, she claimed it as her favorite. But how had it ended up in the hands of Tyrese and Darius? "You never let it go," he murmured to the girl in the photo. "It was yours. So how did they have it?" His voice trembled. He stared down at the boy's toy, now understood to be something far more than a keepsake. And then something else struck him. It wasn't just the car. It was their eyes. The first moment he'd seen them looking up at him on that bench in the park, there had been something unsettlingly familiar in the way they looked at the world with cautious hope, with a hunger not just for food, but for safety, for meaning. It had been the same look in his daughter's eyes every time she tried to make the world better for someone else. Footsteps in the hallway pulled him back. He turned toward the door as it creaked open slowly. Tyrese stood there, small and hesitant, one hand on the frame. "Mr. Carlton, I heard something. I didn't mean to come in." Carlton shook his head gently. "It's okay. Come in." Tyrese stepped inside, eyes wide as he took in the room. He approached slowly, gaze catching on the shelves, the stuffed animals, the framed drawings on the wall. Then his eyes landed on the photo in Carlton's hands. He froze. "That's her," he said softly. Carlton blinked. "You knew her?" Tyrese nodded slowly. "She gave us the car. It was a few years ago. We were sitting under the big tree in the park. It was raining a little. We didn't have coats. My brother was crying because we hadn't eaten that day. And then she came up to us. Just like that." Carlton's grip tightened on the frame. What did she say? She said we looked like we needed something special. I told her we didn't have any money, but she smiled and said, "It's okay. I think this belongs to you now." Then she gave me the car, said it was her favorite, but that it needed a new story. Carlton closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were glassy. He motioned for Tyrese to sit beside him on the bed. For a while, they said nothing. Then Carlton spoke, voice rough and quiet. "That was the last photo we ever took together. 2 weeks later, there was an accident." Tyrese turned to him listening. Carlton continued each word slower than the last. "We were driving home from a weekend trip. A truck ran a red light. I was driving. The impact, it was instant. My wife and daughter, they didn't make it." The silence that followed was thick and respectful. Tyrese looked down at his hands. Then he said softly, "I'm sorry. That must have hurt so much." Carlton nodded, eyes distant. "It did. It still does. For a long time, I thought it was my punishment, that I didn't deserve to be around people anymore, that if I let anyone in, it would only end in loss." Tyrese hesitated, then asked, "Is that why you live here alone?" Carlton gave a bitter smile. "Yes. I thought if I kept everything locked away, I could stop the pain from growing, but all it did was make the silence louder." The boy was quiet for a moment, then said, "My mom says sometimes when we break, we can help others heal. Maybe your daughter knew that. Maybe that's why she gave us the car. So we'd come back to you one day." Carlton looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not just a boy who had known hunger and cold, but someone wise beyond his years, someone carrying light. "You remind me of her," Carlton said, "not because of how you look, but because of how you care." Tyrese gave a small smile. "She reminded me of someone I wanted to be." Carlton placed the photo back on the desk and set the red toy car next to it. "She's still here. In this room, in that car, and in you." Tyrese leaned against him, small and warm. Carlton wrapped an arm around his shoulder this time without hesitation. "Thank you for coming in," he said. "I think I needed this more than I knew." The boy nodded. "Me too." They sat in silence for a while longer, just breathing, letting the past and present settle around them like dust in sunlight. And when they finally stood to leave, Carlton paused at the door, looked back at the room, and whispered, "We're going to be okay." The next morning, sunlight filtered through the windows in soft golden lines, casting warmth into the study where Carlton stood holding his coffee. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a monument to grief. It felt like a home. He could still hear Tyrese's voice from the night before, quiet but steady, offering comfort in a way that few adults ever could. The red toy car now rested on the shelf in his daughter's room, beside the photo that started it all. And though his heart still ached, there was something different about the weight of that pain now. It no longer crushed him. It simply lived beside him. Downstairs, the sound of footsteps, light and fast, signaled the boys were awake. Carlton turned from the window just as Darius burst into the room, hair tousled, face still warm from sleep. "Mr. Carlton," he called. "Tyrese said the garden smells like cinnamon this morning. He thinks Mrs. Lawson planted secret muffins." Carlton chuckled. "Tell Tyrese I'll ask her if she's hiding pastries in the soil." Darius dashed out, and moments later both boys were in the kitchen, leaning over the counter, chattering away, while Mrs. Lawson humored them with stories about edible herbs. It was chaotic, a little loud, and utterly unfamiliar, but Carlton didn't want it to stop. His phone buzzed on the counter. A call from the hospital. He answered, voice immediately composed. "Mr. Carlton, this is Dr. Moreno. I have good news. Angela has responded very well to treatment. We're discharging her this afternoon to continue care as an outpatient." Carlton felt his chest rise with unexpected relief. "That's excellent. I'll bring the boys. We'll be there." When he turned to deliver the news, Tyrese and Darius looked at him wide-eyed, then burst into action, grabbing jackets and racing to the car, as if sheer momentum could make the clock move faster. Carlton followed, keys in hand, smiling as he slid into the driver's seat. The hospital visit was quiet at first. The boys were unusually still, sitting with hands folded as they waited near the front desk. When the elevator doors opened and Angela appeared smaller than they remembered, but upright, alert, smiling, they ran to her with the kind of force only children can manage, arms flung wide. She knelt slowly to meet them, wrapping both boys in a fierce, trembling embrace. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, my beautiful boys," over and over, as if saying it enough times would keep it true. Carlton stood back, letting them have that moment. Angela looked up at him after a while, her face flushed from emotion. "I don't know what to say," she breathed. Carlton shook his head. "You don't have to say anything." They rode home together, Angela nestled in the passenger seat, hands still clasping her son's. She looked out the window, then over her shoulder at the mansion approaching in the distance. "This is where you've been staying?" she asked. Tyrese nodded. "It's huge, Mom. Mr. Carlton even has a telescope and a locked room." But he opened it. Carlton's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Angela raised an eyebrow, clearly noting more beneath the words. When they arrived, Mrs. Lawson had already prepared a room downstairs, fresh sheets, soft lighting, a vase of wild flowers from the garden. Angela was stunned into silence. She moved slowly through the space, eyes landing on the smallest details. A photo frame with an empty insert, a stack of books, a cozy blanket. That evening, they all sat around the dinner table. Carlton served pasta with freshly grated cheese, while the boys recounted every detail of their stay, how they'd helped trim hedges, learn to play chess, and use the telescope to find Saturn. Angela watched Carlton with quiet interest throughout the meal. When he poured her a glass of water and asked how her energy was holding up, her smile was tired but real. After dinner, the boys insisted on a rematch of chess. Carlton sat across from them at the game table while Angela watched from the couch blanket draped over her knees. The game was close, playful, full of side remarks and theatrical thinking poses. And then Darius, with a grin that split his face, called out, "Checkmate, Dad!" Silence fell for a heartbeat. Carlton froze. Tyrese turned to his brother, wide-eyed. Darius blinked, suddenly realizing what he'd said. He backpedaled. "I mean, Mr. Carlton, I didn't mean to." But Carlton didn't look upset. His eyes had softened, his posture still. Slowly, he said, "You called me Dad." Darius bit his lip. "Is that okay?" Carlton reached across the table and touched the boy's hand. "It's more than okay." Angela watched, lips parting in surprise. Her gaze lingered on Carlton, seeing something in him she hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, openness, a man trying to find his way back to something he thought lost. Later that night, after the boys had been tucked in and the house had quieted again, Carlton found himself standing in the doorway of the twins' room. Angela was sitting beside them, reading softly from a worn book, her voice even and gentle. The boys were nearly asleep, faces serene. Carlton didn't speak. He simply stood there watching. This wasn't his memory to make, but maybe, just maybe, it was one he could belong to. Angela looked up and met his eyes. She smiled, no longer cautious, but open. Carlton nodded once and turned away. He walked slowly through the halls, each step echoing softly on hardwood. Everything in the house looked the same, but everything had changed. In the kitchen, he poured a glass of water, stood by the sink, and stared out into the night. This was what it felt like he thought to let the light in. Not all at once, not in some dramatic flood, but in slivers, in laughter over pasta, in whispered bedtime stories, in an accidental word that turned out to be the truth. He wasn't their father. Not by blood, but maybe by choice. And maybe someday soon it wouldn't feel like a choice at all. It would just feel like who he was meant to be. Spring bled gently into early summer, and with each passing day, the house seemed to pulse with new energy. Not the hollow echo of loss, but something quieter, more alive. Carlton now moved through his own home with ease, no longer avoiding certain rooms, no longer hesitating outside the door that had once stayed shut for years. The photo of his daughter and the red toy car remained exactly where he'd placed them, but now they sat beside new additions, a sketch Darius had drawn of the garden, a photo of Tyrese and Carlton at the racetrack, both grinning, arms linked. The house wasn't forgetting the past. It was holding it alongside the present. Saturday mornings had a rhythm now. Pancakes, garden runs, and debates over which superhero would win in a foot race. Carlton found himself looking forward to the noise, to the chaos, to the unfiltered joy of two boys who no longer flinched when someone raised their voice or asked about their future. Angela, now stronger by the day, had taken over organizing school supplies and coordinating doctor visits. Carlton helped where he could, though he often found himself simply watching, still adjusting to the shape his life had taken, still startled that peace could settle in so quietly. One particular morning, as sunlight streamed across the kitchen counter and the boys squabbled over syrup distribution, Carlton's attorney, Marvin Pierce, arrived for a scheduled meeting. Carlton greeted him at the door, crisp but relaxed in a polo shirt and worn jeans, a version of himself his boardroom hadn't seen in a decade. Marvin raised an eyebrow. "Retirement looks good on you." Carlton laughed. "I'm not retired, just recalibrated." They settled into the study, coffee mugs in hand, the sound of kids' footsteps thudding overhead. "I want to talk about something official," Carlton said, eyes focused. "Guardianship." Marvin straightened. Of the boys, Carlton nodded. "Angela is still their mother, and that doesn't change. But if anything happens to her, or if she ever needs support legally or financially, I want it written down. Not just trust funds. I want responsibility, permanence. No red tape, no questions." Marvin was silent for a beat. Then he said, "This isn't a temporary arrangement anymore." "It hasn't been for a while," Carlton replied. "They drafted papers that day. Not adoption, not yet, but a structure that meant something more than guest beds and shared meals. A legal framework that said in black and white what their hearts already knew, that this was family." Later that evening, Carlton called a quiet meeting on the back patio. The boys were barefoot, grass-stained from playing soccer. Angela wore one of her few good blouses, the one she'd kept pristine through all the hardship, as if saving it for a moment where dignity would matter. Carlton cleared his throat. "I want to talk to all of you. I know none of this was planned. Not the meeting on the park bench. Not the hospital stay. Not the mornings when we all fight over who gets the last pancake. But I need you to understand something. You've changed this place. You've changed me." Tyrese sat up straighter. Darius clutched a cushion in his lap. "I spoke with a lawyer," Carlton continued. "Nothing's changing right away, but I've made it so that if anything ever happens, I'll be there legally, officially. I'll have the right to protect you, to make decisions, to keep you safe." Angela's hand went to her mouth. Her eyes shimmered. "I know you have your mother," he said, turning to the boys, "and I will never replace her or try to. But if the world ever turns sideways again, I don't want you wondering where you belong." Darius blinked hard. "We belong here." Angela whispered, "You didn't have to do that." "I did," Carlton replied, "because I need to know you'll be okay. Because family isn't always about who we lose. It's about who we choose when we get the chance." The boys got up and hugged him first, tight and unafraid. Angela stood last, but when she reached him, she didn't speak. She just placed a hand over his heart, and he placed his hand over hers. The next day, Carlton took them all to his family's old summer cabin, a quiet place by the lake he hadn't visited since before the accident. He'd almost sold it a dozen times, but something had always stopped him. Now, walking through the creaky doors with Angela and the boys behind him, he understood why. It wasn't meant to be a relic. It was meant to be renewed. They fished badly. Burnt marshmallows over a fire pit. Darius discovered a talent for skipping stones. Tyrese found his name in a carved heart on a bench from decades ago and declared it a sign. Carlton stood at the edge of the dock one night, watching the stars ripple across the lake. Angela joined him. "They seem happy," she said. "They are. And you." He exhaled. "I thought happiness was something I had to let go of. But maybe it just changes form." Angela nodded. "I used to think we only got one story, one path. But I think we're allowed to write new ones." He glanced sideways. "Do you think they'll remember this?" "All of it." Angela smiled. "They'll remember who showed up." Carlton nodded slowly, the weight in his chest replaced by something else heavier but warmer. He had lost, yes, deeply, permanently, but he had also chosen to keep living, to love in the present not as a replacement, but as a continuation. Back at the mansion, a new calendar appeared on the fridge, not digital, but paper. Handwritten, with notes from all of them: Tyrese's school play, Darius's soccer tryout, Carlton's day off. The handwriting overlapped, messy and human. It was no longer just his house. It was theirs. A place where grief and joy could sit at the same table, where a red toy car still rested quietly on a shelf. But beside it now sat a Lego creation labeled Our Family Car 2.0. Carlton passed it every day and smiled. Not because the pain had vanished, but because something beautiful had taken root in its place. 1 year later, the house no longer echoed with silence. It breathed. It sang in the soft shuffle of feet on hardwood floors, in the smell of cinnamon and coffee on weekend mornings, in the arguments over which cereal belonged to whom. Carlton Harrison stood by the kitchen window with a mug in his hand, the same window he used to stare out of in the stillness of morning. And now he watched as Tyrese chased Darius across the lawn, both boys shrieking barefoot and wild, exactly the way children should be. The spring sunlight bathed the home in a golden calm that Carlton had never dared to hope for. But here it was. Not forced, not staged, just real. And his. The frame photo on the windowsill had changed, or rather grown. His daughter's picture still sat at the center, still sacred, but beside it now were snapshots of a different kind of family. Darius covered in dirt, holding a soccer trophy. Tyrese mid-laugh at the dinner table, mouth wide with joy. Angela icing a birthday cake with a crooked smile and flour on her cheek. Carlton picked up the newest photo, a group picture from the cabin, all four of them around a fire pit, warm faces glowing in firelight. He set it back gently. Nothing erased what he lost, but he no longer feared that loving again meant forgetting. That afternoon, Tyrese came home with a permission slip and a nervous expression. "Dad," he said, and the words still stirred something deep in Carlton, something unsteady and whole. "There's a Father's Day assembly next week. We're supposed to bring someone to talk about what makes a good dad." Carlton blinked. "Do you want me to come? I already wrote your name on the form." Tyrese grinned. "I just wanted to tell you first." Carlton nodded slowly. "Then I'll be there." Angela heard about it at dinner. She paused mid-bite and gave Carlton a look full of meaning. "They didn't hesitate," she said quietly later when they stood alone in the hallway. "They never have," Carlton replied. The day of the assembly arrived with bright skies and the hum of anticipation. Carlton dressed with deliberate care, choosing a simple navy blazer, the same one he'd worn to board meetings. But this time, the meeting wasn't about profit or strategy. This was more important. The boys rode with him to the school, Tyrese fidgeting with the hem of his shirt, Darius holding a folded poster under one arm. The school gym was filled with rows of folding chairs, walls covered in handmade drawings, and banners that read, "Dads are heroes." Carlton sat in the second row, surrounded by men in baseball caps and button-downs, and for a brief moment, he wondered if he belonged there. But then Tyrese turned around from the front row and gave him a thumbs up, and Carlton exhaled. When it was their turn, the boys stepped onto the stage with confident, if slightly shaky steps. Tyrese held the microphone first. "This is our dad," he said, gesturing toward Carlton. He didn't have to be, but he chose to be. Darius unrolled the poster. It showed a cartoon version of Carlton with two smaller figures beside him, all three standing in front of the mansion with a red toy car between them. "He taught us how to use tools, how to tie ties, and how to fix stuff," Darius said. "But more than that, he makes us feel safe, like we matter, like we belong." Carlton sat frozen, every word sinking in, landing deeper than he expected. Around him, parents clapped, some nodded. One man reached over and squeezed his shoulder gently. Angela stood at the back of the room, arms folded over her chest, eyes glistening. When it was over, the boys jumped down and ran to Carlton, flanking him like bookends. He wrapped an arm around each one and said nothing, afraid his voice might crack the moment wide open. That night the house was quiet again, but not the lonely kind, the settled kind. Angela was in the kitchen humming while organizing leftovers. The boys had collapsed after dinner, limbs sprawled on the couch, tangled in each other like puppies. Carlton stepped into the room with something behind his back. "I got something today," he said. Angela raised an eyebrow. "Do I want to know?" He pulled out a wooden plaque. It read, "Father of the Year, Tyrese and Darius Pick." Angela laughed genuinely, a sound that used to feel foreign in this house, but now landed like a familiar song. "They made it themselves," she said, brushing flour from her hands. Cardboard was too flimsy. Carlton turned the plaque in his hands, then set it on the mantel beside the red toy car. Later, he wandered into the room that had once been a shrine, his daughter's room. Nothing had been moved, but beside the shelf of her books was a new addition, a framed drawing the boys had made. It showed a big heart with 4 stick figures inside, labeled carefully, "Tyrese, Darius, Mom, Mr. C." He traced a finger along the edges of her photo. "I still miss you," he whispered, "but I'm not lost anymore, and neither are they." He left the door open when he walked out. No longer a mausoleum, just a room with memories and space for more. In the weeks that followed, summer took hold. They planted vegetables in the backyard. Carlton taught the boys how to change a bike tire. Angela painted the porch swing white, and on Sundays she sat there reading while the boys ran barefoot across the lawn. On a quiet evening as the sun dipped below the treetops, Carlton joined Angela on the swing. He didn't say anything at first, just listened to the wind, to the sounds of their world. "Do you ever think," Angela said softly, "that this was always going to happen?" "No," Carlton replied, "but I think she would have wanted me to open the door, to her room, to life." Angela nodded. "You did." He looked over at her not with romance, but with something just as rare. Understanding, respect, shared healing. "You didn't just take us in," she said. "You let us build something here." Carlton nodded, "And now I can't imagine it without you." That night, the four of them ate popsicles on the back steps. The boys invented a game involving fireflies and sock balls. Angela shook her head at the chaos. Carlton laughed until his stomach hurt. He went to bed with the window cracked open, the sound of the boys' laughter still echoing faintly in the dark. For the first time in years, he didn't reach for the photo before sleep. He didn't need to. Love was still here, not just in memory, but in motion, in the footsteps down the hall, in the voices that called him Dad, in the life that somehow had found him again.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.